Also, we're live. No, you got it. We're on the Young Street. We're missing. Yeah, we're not doing it over. Okay. Why is it looking like that? She shouldn't be getting an Adobe. No. Oh.
Is there technical? Do we need a recess?
Update. Just set here.
Recess, or are you okay?
Okay, yes. I'd like to call this meeting to order and acknowledge that we're Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. With me today is Gisela Renthal, VP by Rep, and Mr. Richard Whitbread, who is sitting 2 seats from me. My name is Harvey Diamond. Our administrative assistant is Jason Robertson, and the City of Winnipeg is being represented by Kevin Wong, who is attending by Zoom. To the Zoom participants of our hearing, please note that you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it's your turn, you will be admitted to the meeting. Kindly follow along with the City of Winnipeg's Order of Vision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close and mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment law in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing must be sworn testimony, and when speaking to a matter must be sworn in. Be advised that comparative assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decision based on the evidence provided at the hearing and issues a written order that we mail to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions in respect to an application may be appealed. The Manitoba Municipal Assessment Board, if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to an application for exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I'll confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will be given an opportunity to summarize if they wish to do so. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. Also repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all issues will be heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. Receive the Board's order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of a public record. Thank you, and we can swear in the parties for the first item. Thank you.
Mr. Assessor.
Yes.
Please state your full name.
Kem Wong.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant. Please state your full name. Jared Story. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe the first item we're hearing today is the application on 54 Yonge Street. And before we do so, though, we were advised that the applicant's material for all the matters today was received a day late because of a computer error. I'd like to know what the assessment department's position is on that, Mr. Wong.
The assessor's position, my position?
Yes.
I think it's okay. I mean, there are some times that evidence can be a little bit late. It wasn't nefarious or for any sort of maybe not so great reason. I don't see a problem with the evidence being late.
Okay, on that basis, then I think that we have some board members, I think will agree then to hear the matters and to allow the applicants to provide their evidence when the time comes. But you can start, Mr. Assessor, Mr. Young, on our first property, 54 Young Street. You ready?
Okay. The subject property is 54 Young Street. The roll number is 120-909-61000. It's a residential apartment block that's 3 stories high. It was built in 1926, but we have an effective year built of 1970 because due to renovations. There are 37 suites. On page 3 is the location of the subject property with an overhead view. On page 4 are some pictures of the interior. The property has been renovated and it appears to be in good condition. On page 5 is our income valuation summary. We used average rents of $831 to get a potential income of $369,000. We used a 3.2% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $357,000. We used a 48% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $185,000. Capped at 5.5%, we have an estimated market value of $3,340,000. On page 6 are our rent comparables, showing that the rents that we've used are in line with what's on the market. On page 7 is information on how we derived our cap rates. And the majority of our cap rates range between 4.8 and 5.6% for apartment buildings. On page 8 are some cap rate sales. Uh, 859 Grosvenor is a renovated apartment building, and it is renovated and to a fairly nice level, but it is similar to the subject property in terms of its original age, and it sold for $170,000 per unit, which is higher and supportive of the $90,000 per unit that we've assigned. On page 9 is some cap rate information from Altus Group indicating the cap rate being around 4.5%. The chart only goes up to 2017, but the trend from Altus and Canada-wide has maintained that it's been the same for the past from 2017 to 2021. So, and maybe even has gone down a bit lower. So I believe that supports that the cap rate that we've used at 5.55%. On page 11 and 13, or on page 11 to 14, are the income statements supplied by the owner. If you look on page 11, there's something that's a little bit strange in the sense that if you look at their maintenance or repair on page 11, it's $44,400 for the year 2020. If you look on page 13, their repair and maintenance is $44,400 for 2019. So it's a little bit strange that their repair and maintenance and their waste and their security is the same for both years. So I'm not sure what's going on with the expenses, But if you go back to page 11, the income that is the subject property is achieving is $346,000. And if you go back to page 5, the model is estimated $357,000. So it looks like the model is a bit high in this regard. And to recognize that, I'd like to use an effective gross income of $346,432. And the model expenses are at 48.11%. I think that's reasonable for this well-maintained building. And so the expenses are $165,225. And the resulting net operating income is $181,207. Capped at 5.55%. The value is $3,265,000.
Could you repeat that, please? 3,000,003?
$3,265,000.
Thank you.
So the rent that we're using is in line with what the subject property is getting, and the expenses, they seem a little bit weird, seeing as that they're the same from year to year. And so I think using the model's 48% is reasonable, considering that it's a well-maintained building. And the new value per unit is approximately $88,000 per unit, and I believe that's supported by the market sales that we have. And having said that, I ask that you accept the revised value of $3,265,000.
Story, his recommendation, right?
No, thank you, Mr. Wong. I do appreciate it, but I'd like to proceed, Mr. Chair.
Is there any further evidence from the assessor, Mr. Wong?
Pardon me?
So long as do you have any further evidence to submit?
Do I have anything else?
Yes.
No.
Okay, so we have questions then. Mr. Story, do you have any questions about Mr. Wong?
Thank you, sir. I have a few questions, and Mr. Chair, I will, because many of these properties on the docket today are very, very similar. They're in the same area, same vintage. I will ask that some of the questions regarding cap rate and general considerations be carried forward to the other matters on the docket, if that is.
That is not only satisfactory, but we encourage that, and we all will recall the questions you asked on this, and we will apply it to each one of the properties.
So the first line of question, maybe my presentation may be a little bit longer, but then I assure you it'll be expedient going forward. So I thank you. Mr. Wong, have you visited this property or any of the other properties on our docket today?
I'm not sure. It's possible that I might have inspected them in the past.
Okay, but for the purpose of our exercise today, is it safe to say that you have not visited these properties on a site-specific basis?
I would say so.
Okay. Now I noticed there's a fairly large delta in the actual year built and the effective year, and you mentioned renovations. Now, just to be very clear, those would be cosmetic changes as opposed to structural changes. Is that fair to say?
I'm not sure about the full depth of the renovations.
Okay, but it's based on things like painting and flooring as opposed to foundation work and other structural issues. Is that typically how the variants are applied? Is it fair to say that an assessor visits the property and makes a subjective decision. It's largely based on cosmetic adjustments to the property. Is that fair?
I think it's based off of changes that would affect the income potential, and so it's possible that anything that would potentially increase or decrease the income potential of the property is how it would be looked at.
Okay, and the effective age affects the value ascribed by the model. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so and I appreciate that you've done an analysis on the rent, so that's fine. We'll talk mostly about cap rate, but is there a cutoff? So say, for example, if the variant age that was objectively provided by the city was, say, 1964, would that lead to a different expense ratio or a different cap rate, perhaps?
I'm not sure what the exact cutoffs are. It does affect the cap rate.
Okay. And does this building have any parking?
It doesn't appear so, no.
Okay. Does the model consider the fact that there's no parking? I understand that it would likely consider it in the effective gross income, but does it consider no parking as a negative influence on cap rate in the model?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And in terms of the suite mix, would the model consider this an inferior suite mix?
I am not sure.
Okay. The vacancy rate that you've used here today, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's the same across the board. It's 3.2. Is there anything in your evidence to support a 3.2 vacancy rate?
I have not provided any evidence for that.
Okay. Okay. Now, the cap rate, of course, is modeled. We've established that. I just want to go through your cap rate chart on page 7 of your evidence that you've submitted. Okay, so basically, we looked at this, and can you tell me how many sales were included in this analysis?
I do not know.
How many buildings were in the downtown area?
I don't know. I don't know the details about the cap rate sales that were included in the analysis, so it might save you some time.
Okay, that's fine. But are the inputs then available for the taxpayer or their agents to review in the interest of transparency? Are we able to review the inputs that were used to create this table?
No, but the sales that were these cap rate analysis are based off of sales that have occurred in the city of Winnipeg, and we've provided some examples of it to substantiate what the model has utilized. And also, like I said, when you look at what Altus Group has presented in terms of cap rates, it's also in line with that as well. So
I agree with that. Let's stay on page 7 for one moment. Now, in determining the cap rates entered into the model, were actual NOIs used, or were they estimated by the model?
They were, you can see on the second paragraph of my page 7.
Okay, so it does say that the cap rates were derived from model-generated estimates of net operating
of the net operating income.
Right. So then, effectively, if there are 3 variables here, there's the sale price, there's the NOI, and then there's the cap rate. The only true number in this analysis would be the sales price. Is that fair to say? Everything else is model-derived, generated, or estimated. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Page 7. Mr. Chair, I've submitted some rebuttal, but I'll just speak to it. You've been provided with it. You can check that what I'm saying is correct. I won't make a separate presentation on it. But
we have. You're going to bring up your rebuttal now, because I will send it to them.
Sure.
It has not been sent yet.
Okay, I'm just going to speak to it. But sure, that would be fine. This is based on our review of these individual cap rates that were submitted by the assessment department.
The one thing is that, you're doing this right now.
Yeah.
And the way we formulate is that technically Mr. Wong would have to question you on, because you're giving evidence at that point.
Sure.
Finish your questions, I'm assuming.
It's just part of my questioning, and it's supported by.
Well, and if you forward us questions, that's fine, but if you're
That's what I
presenting
would do.
evidence,
I will form it.
you have to wait to do that.
Absolutely, I will form it in questions if that's you're okay with that. So it says firstly that the sample cap rates were provided to illustrate the accuracy of the model, but all of these cap rates are below the low end of your model. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so they don't indeed illustrate the accuracy of the model. So that would be an error, would it not?
Well, it does indicate that the cap rates can be on the lower end of the range. They can be low.
Now, there are no NOIs or workups provided. Is that fair? So the taxpayer, agents, nor the board are able to review the accuracy of these cap rates. Is that fair?
I think there is no additional information for review. What could be reviewed is the final value indication of value, and if you look at the final indication of value, you could look at the market in terms of comparable sales to try to determine how accurate it is, and so I think you could determine it that way.
Okay, but once again, those cap rates are imputed by knowing a sales price. There's an NOI that's either, I don't know if it's model generated or if somebody in the department has done it, but at any rate, we're not able to see it. Is that fair?
There is no additional details, no. Okay.
Now we looked into these sales a little bit, and from what we can see, are you aware that the first property on McPhillips was advertised with an NOI 970,869, which leads us to a 5% cap rate. If we take that NOI and the sales price, that's a 5 cap. Are you aware of that?
Sometimes the advertised NOIs aren't exactly accurate. Like whenever somebody, it seems like from my experience that when owner is trying to sell something, they tend to exaggerate the NOI, and so what happened at the 2390 McPhillips is that my colleague looked at the actual performance of the property based off of the information that we have, and it indicated a 4.79 cap based off of actual information.
But again, we're not able to see that. That's fine. Moving on to Burnell. We couldn't find anything on land titles. Was that a share sale?
I am not sure.
So then you don't know if any non-realty considerations would have been included in that sale? Or if it was exposed to the market?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Now in terms of IAAO standards, which you mentioned here in your cap rate evidence, are assessors permitted or precluded from using share sales?
I am not sure.
Okay, same question for 700 St. Mary's, same scenario?
It would be the same answer.
Okay. Pembina and Grosvenor, those were sold together as a portfolio, is that correct?
Pardon me?
Those were sold together, Pembina and Grosvenor, are you aware of that?
No.
Those were somewhat high profile. They were in the news. Now, am I correct in reading the IAAO standards on verification adjustment of sales in section 5.6 that multiple parcel sales that involve multiple economic units generally should not be used in valuation or ratio studies? Is that correct?
It's possible, but it said it generally, so maybe you can.
All right, now moving on to page 9, you mentioned something about the Canada-wide trend that Altus is. Did you submit anything to that effect? This is the first I'm hearing. Submitted anything to evidence regarding Canada-wide cap rates by Altus?
Yeah, it's very similar to the chart that I submitted on page 9.
Okay, that's fine. I don't have that here, but again, this chart was used in the previous cycle, and you're aware, of course, that these cap rates include all sales, including those with the intention to renovate, which the municipal board has said we are not to use in cap rate analysis. You're aware of that, correct?
It sort of seems like this is what Altus is indicating as their cap rates.
Okay, and just to be very, very clear, as I mentioned, this was submitted by the department in some cases in the previous cycle, and I can't help but notice, but the end date is 2017. That's a full 4 years prior to our reference date. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, do you have any questions to raise?
Fine, thank you.
Ms. Randall, do you have any questions? Okay, so when I'm looking at your capitalization rate evidence, and I'm trying to see comparables, that the only property I see here was built some time ago was the property of Grosvenor Avenue. The others are all much more recently built than the property that we're dealing with today. Do you agree?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I'm looking at your evidence on page 8, your capitalization rate evidence.
Yes.
And I'm looking at the year built of all the properties. The only one that I see built some time ago is the property in Grosvenor.
Yeah.
And the others are all later built than the subject property we're dealing with today.
Yeah, it seems like the most comparable one in terms of the age would be Grosvenor. That one was I would say it was renovated, and it was renovated to a higher than average level. And so I mean, the subject property is renovated, but not nearly to the same level. But it's just an indication that what a renovated early 1900 building could sell for.
Okay, and also I think you have to agree that Grosvenor is a much nicer address than Yonge Street. An investor would probably view it as a property that had more potential, perhaps.
Yeah, I would say it is. There's a more potential on Grosvenor. At the same time, it's indicating that the Grosvenor was a 4.68 cap rate, and the subject property is being assigned a 5.55 cap rate. So I think it's a little bit higher.
Yeah, that's a fair answer. Yeah, I have no further questions. Okay, so Mr. Story, you can go ahead with your
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing up the locational issue. I neglected to mention that, and I would have been mad at myself for not bringing that up if I left you without mentioning that. So thank you again. So here we are on Yonge Street. We're on the west side of Yonge, between Balmoral and Langside. This is considered the West Broadway neighborhood. Again, the improvement is 3.5 stories. It was built in 1926 and is presently being used as a multifamily residential building. The city has applied an effective age variant of 1970 to the building, but again, typically these adjustments are based on cosmetic adjustments to the property that subtend the rents being achieved, as opposed to extending the physical life of the property. We have to recognize that this property was indeed built in 1926. The site size is 25,312 square feet, and it is zoned R2 as opposed to RMFM. Presumably this is based on age and would constitute a legal non-conforming use. The subject property has 37 units, 7 bachelor suites, and 31 bedroom units. And once again, the building has no parking. So we have performed a site-specific analysis on all of the properties on our docket today. We've looked at the actual income and expenses, and our methodology is to take the three relevant years leading up to the reference date and stabilizing into what we'll call a typical or current year. And this is consistent with how a prudent purchaser would view the income stream of one of these assets. We then look to the market for capitalization rate evidence. And again, you've all been provided with our 2023 cap rate study, which I will summarize for you, but you've all been provided that document. I will summarize it in this hearing and then ask again that it carries forward. So again, we've looked at the market rent and vacancy. We've also noted collection loss in our valuation, as well as miscellaneous income accruing to the owner by way of line items such as parking and laundry. In this case, parking is not applicable, but laundry would be. So the effective gross income with consideration paid to the potential market rent less vacancy and collection loss, but including miscellaneous income, is calculated as $348,899. This figure is lower than the city's initial model figure. The city has applied a modeled expense ratio of 48.11, which is typically a red flag for a property this age. Any expense ratio below 50% would typically be considered low. And the actual expenses are calculated as $188,730, which leads us to an expense ratio of 54.09, which makes sense. Now, the assessor brought up the issue of the owner budgeting their R&M and certain line items, and that is true. Those are budget numbers that the owner uses. The owner for all of these properties today is the same. They own 25 properties in the inner city, so they are well aware of their R&M, and I would suggest that if you were to defer to one or the other, that the owner would likely have a better handle on their R&M than the city's model. So I do submit that even though they are not exact to the penny for each property, they are in fact budgeted, and in some cases they may be low because, as we know, cost of materials has certainly escalated in and around the reference period. So I think that those numbers should be considered as submitted by the owner. Now, the major issue that we'll be having with a number of these properties, we'll be dealing with Spence and West Broadway. Both areas have similar characteristics. Now, the assessor is using a cap rate of 5.55. We believe this to be very low. We also believe that the assessor's cap rate information is inconsistent and should be taken as such. We've provided you with a large cap rate study, and I will summarize by saying that properties built before 1946 typically would be applied in our study a cap rate of 6.1 to 6.6. However, we do recognize that this property has been well maintained. It's, that's typically seen in the rents. So as a baseline, we would likely apply something in the neighborhood of 5.5 to 5.75 in the mind of a prudent purchaser. We consider certain factors affecting the cap rate. Masonry construction would be a positive. However, this building does not contain any amenities. We see a shifting tenant preference in this cycle, and this property is a sort of a typical character building in the core area of Winnipeg without any amenities. And we have seen from tenants that there's a preference shift for more than what this property is offering in the market. The potential for income growth is poor based on the location, and we will suggest to you that the suite mix is inferior. Again, there is no parking. The property is 96 years old. That's the foundation of the structure. It's 96 years old. Again, the location would be considered below average or inferior. There are external influences that would be considered negative. I visited this property. I can tell you that the back alleys around this property are have some considerable challenges that would not escape scrutiny by a reasonable purchaser. And then further to that, supply and demand issues have become more of an issue in this cycle, I think, than at the previous reference date. And we are seeing that the multifamily inventory does appear to be saturated, and new supplies of the reference date continues to come on stream, which has accelerated the obsolescence of Winnipeg's older multifamily stock. So with all of that being said, we've applied an overall capitalization rate of 6%. Now, I'm sort of jumping around here, and I apologize, but the cap rate study that I've provided to you hits on many of these points. I will summarize very, very quickly. Effectively, we've looked to the market. The market is telling us from the brokers that there's been very little, this is on page 2, there's been very little cap rate compression cycle over cycle. From April 1 of 2018 to April 1 of 2021, there's been at most, and in very specific property types, 25 basis points of compression, and we recognize that. Now, typically that would not affect the properties that we're hearing today, but as an overall view, if we see compression in the market, it's typically on high rises or some higher grade low rises. Again, there are various factors affecting cap rates: the building type and construction, heritage status designation is considered in our analysis. Amenities, again, tenant preferences have changed. More people are working from home. Now that's not post-COVID. That's a trend that was happening pre-COVID. The city of Winnipeg notes that in their economic plan that a pre-existing trend was more work from home and a general preference for amenities. So we're looking for in-suite laundry as tenants, balconies, outdoor spaces, walk-up access, office or den space, business spaces, and gyms. Now, clearly, the properties that we're dealing with today, so I will mention a number of times that there is increased functional obsolescence by the new product coming on market, and these don't include office spaces, gyms, business spaces, balconies, or walk-up access. So that's to be considered. The durability and the quality of income should be considered based on the area, the potential for the income stream to appreciate, to satisfy investor returns would be a question mark at best. So we're suggesting that the durability and quality of income for these properties that we're dealing with today should be considered likely a negative factor and certainly not a positive factor. Age is considered in cap rate, in our cap rate analysis. Older units clearly have a shorter remaining economic life with possible functional obsolescence. Of course, there's the question of condition, parking, and suite mix. Now, this is very interesting. We've seen a shift in preference from bachelor and one-bedroom suites to larger units. CMHC is showing us that between October of 18 and October of 20, vacancy rates increased the most for bachelor units. This is a new development, as well as one-bedroom units. 2 and 3 bedroom units. 2 bedroom units effectively stayed flat, but 3 bedroom units, the vacancy went down by 1.2%. This is substantial when we're dealing with 3.7% down to 2.5. That's a substantial drop in vacancy for larger units. So buildings with higher mixes of bachelor and one bedroom units, such as the properties we're looking at today, will typically carry a higher risk. Locational and external factors. Now, this is very interesting. I was in preparing for this, for these properties today. I was looking into some of the issues around housing in the West Broadway area, West End in general, and I found a plan from the West Broadway Community Organization. So it's not coming from us. This is coming from the community organization who is invested in developing new properties in the area, and they have a section in their housing plan, section 5.6, which is called Impediments to Private Development. And it says there's a desperate need for low-income units in West Broadway, but there are some broad economic factors influencing the ability of developers to create them. Principally, the cost of buildings, land, and construction has gone up dramatically, and the amount of income people have available for rent has not kept pace. This means that it's no longer possible for the private market to create low-income housing without government investment of some sort. Private investors and developers, both for-profit and not-for-profit, have identified a number of impediments to investment in West Broadway, specifically perception in broader Winnipeg. The neighborhood is not safe and there's a lot of crime. This reduces interest and demand for housing. A negative perception of rooming houses and SROs, issues around permissions from the community and the city of Winnipeg regarding development, and a sense that developers cannot make enough profit due to a number of factors: lack of availability of land, zoning regulations, cost of building, lenders having more stringent guidelines and break-even points, and insufficient access to grants and a lack of funding. So clearly, the market is telling us that there are some impediments to development in this area, and so that's a locational adjustment that should be considered when we're looking at the cap rates in these properties. I don't know that the model considers these factors as they're typically algorithmic. We've provided 6 sales, and again, as the assessor would say, and we would say as well, these are not meant to be comparable for any specific property, but rather they support our study and they support our table. So again, we've suggested that we would start typically for many of these properties somewhere in that 5.5% to 6%, and then adjust upward or downward based on what we're seeing on a site-specific basis. I've included some information on starting on page 27 regarding vacancy, but just to sum it up, for the properties that we're dealing with today, CMHC considers this the core area, which is zones 1 through 4. In October of 20, bachelor vacancy was 4.4%. One bedroom vacancy was 5.4%. 2-bedroom vacancy was 5.7%, and 3-bedroom vacancy was 3.6%, giving us an overall vacancy in the core area for all the properties we're dealing with today of no less than 5.3%. So 3.2 is not a viable vacancy rate from our perspective as applied by the city. I've included this chart. This is CMHC's supply and demand chart. And basically, what's very interesting, you can see where apartment starts. This is where new builds of apartments start to really take off in and around 17 and 18. So we're going to talk this cycle a great deal about supply and demand, about the glut of supply in the Winnipeg market, and that's evidenced by CMHC. In preparation for this cycle, we've also been tracking development applications and permits. So in terms of permits, on page 36, you can see in the Northwest, we've gone into quadrants as well as a central, we've broken the city up by quadrants and then isolated the core as well. In the Northwest, prior to 2021, there were 728 assets. Between 21 and 22, there were 700 more new assets coming on stream. In the Northeast, it's even worse, 153 existing, 480 being built. Central, 1,050 with 392 new assets being developed. In the Southwest, 1,532 with over 1,700 new units being developed. And in the Southeast, 412 existing with 594 being developed. So as you can see, the supply side is outpacing demand. There's a great deal of new product coming onto market. And of course, these are new, latest and greatest, all the best amenities. So where does that leave properties in the downtown with no amenities? It is our position that the functional obsolescence and the competitive nature of the market will inherently be a negative influence on some of these properties. So respectfully, we're submitting that all of these issues regarding cap rates carry forward to all of the properties that we're looking at today. They're all very similar, so they should apply. I will point out certain issues if they are slightly different. I know there's one on Sherbrooke where we have applied a slightly higher adjustment, but for the purpose of this, for this property, we are suggesting that a cap rate of 6% is perhaps optimistic, but certainly appropriate. So that is my presentation on cap rate. And again, back to my brief on 54 Yonge. With all of that being said, with a review of 3 years of stabilized income and expense, capitalized with 6% cap rate, we come to a market value at the reference date of no more than $2,669,000. That's $2,669,000, and we do respectfully submit that the value be adjusted to reflect the market potential of the asset at the reference date. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Support questioning by the assessor. What NOI are you using to get?
Oh, I'm sorry. The NOI that I'm using in my brief is 160,168. 160,168. Thank you very much.
Mr. Wong, any questions?
With your cap rate study, you're sort of indicating that the market in all respects, especially some of the older properties, like you're suggesting that the market is going down for apartment buildings? Is that what you're suggesting when you're talking about all the considerations that you should be giving?
What do you mean by going down?
The value.
Well, I think the value is that we've analyzed is lower than what the city is suggesting, to be certain. I think
generally speaking.
Pardon me?
Generally speaking, you're talking about the all the considerations with regards to the vacancy being higher, the demand being more challenging, or the risks being higher. Are you saying that the values are going down?
No, I'm suggesting to you that rent is appreciating as per CMHC in most cases. But we are seeing that vacancy is increasing as per CMHC. For example, brand new apartments, the vacancy rate is 7.4%. That's telling us that absorption is slowing down. Your cap rates are understated. We're suggesting that cap rates are typically static from the previous cycle. There's appreciation in rent, and we've used the actual rents. They're not modeled, they're actual. This is what the owner of these properties and many other properties are able to achieve. This is the economic reality of these properties. So I don't totally understand your question. What I will say is the cap rates that the city has applied, from our perspective, appear to be depressed versus what we're seeing in the market. The rents are actual, not modeled, and our expense ratios are actual. They're not modeled. So we're using real numbers, and we've analyzed the market to determine appropriate cap rates for older stock, and that's how we've determined our value today.
Okay, and on your last page, page 96.
Okay.
That chart seems to actually no, that would be all my questions.
Thank you.
Stuart, any questions of the
Looking at the information in front of me, and seeing a sale in 202 of 340,000 and a sale in 207 of 1,200,000. Are you able to comment on those?
No, not actually. I didn't look into the sales. I'm not sure. I don't know if they were purchased.
May I redirect that to the assessor? Absolutely. Mr. Assessor?
Yeah.
The sales info provided is 202, 340,000 and 207, 1,200,000. Can you comment on that?
Which sales?
The two sales on this property, one in 202 at 340,000 and one in 207 at 1,200,000. I think that came right.
No, I guess I don't really have any comment on that. In that, I guess 2007 was a while ago comparative to the reference date. I mean, the what I have seen is that properties have doubled and tripled over the period of time. So I think that it is consistent with what the market has been doing over the past 10, 15, 20 years.
So you have no information on those sales?
No, I don't.
It's evidence from your brief.
Yeah, that's the history. That's the sales history of the subject property.
Thank you. No further questions.
Yes, I'm just wondering about the vacancy rate that you spoke of.
Yes.
And I noticed that on this property income and expense questionnaire, your client has indicated they've got a 4% vacancy rate.
Correct.
And you indicated that you thought the average was around 5.3%.
Yes. Yes.
So you're not suggesting any change to the vacancy rate?
So I'm using the actuals, and the client is also reporting between 1.9 to 3% collection loss, which is bad debt, and then which is typical on some of these properties. That's in some areas. So just for example, I neglected to mention this, but the average median household income in Spence in Central Park, which is, we'll see one property right across the street from Central Park on Balmoral, Spence, Central Park, and West Broadway are well below half of the city average and the city median. So in those situations, we see a fair bit of turnover, and we do see a fair bit of collection loss. So because we are doing a site-specific analysis, we have considered those factors. So we see that we've used 4% for this property as standard vacancy, which seems reasonable given what we've learned about bachelors and one bedrooms. Of course, there's a preponderance of one bedrooms with 30, and then seven bachelors, so 4% is supported. But we've also included the actual collections in our calculations. So we think that holds together.
So the bad debts have increased, have they, from your last reporting period?
The bad debts from 19 to 20 increased by one percentage point, from 2% to 3%. Yeah, which makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Story, you indicated that you're using an NOI to get that. 160,168, and I noticed that in the 2019 report, you're showing an NOI of 173,793.
I have it here's 174,336, but that's
Yeah,
fine. It's in the same.
Yeah, so that's quite a substantial deduction or decline from what you're claiming is.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're correct. 173. Right. So in 2020, the NOI was 151,873.
Right.
It was 153,913 in 2018. So there has been a sort of an up and down trajectory in terms of the NOI of this property, but we have stabilized it as a, if one were looking to purchase this property, they wouldn't use the highest year, they wouldn't use the lowest year, they would stabilize out.
We've looked at more than 2 years too. I mean, especially with such discrepancy.
Sure, we've looked at 3 years, and you know, if we're somewhere between 153 and 173, then I think that 160 makes sense.
Okay, look at the questions. Thank you. Thank you. So we've completed this, and we can proceed with our next property agenda, which is.
I'm sorry, there is some rebuttal information from, I guess, maybe Mr. Story and myself.
I'm sorry?
I think there's some rebuttal information from Mr. Story and myself.
Yeah.
Please,
Mr. has rebuttal as well.
Oh, sure.
okay. Sorry, I didn't realize it. You have a rebuttal, please.
So.
It's in your file labeled A&T rebuttal for Altus cap rate study. Should be the second one down in the top.
Okay, proceed, Mr. Wong, when you're ready.
I guess with regards to my rebuttal document, I guess, do you guys all have it?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I guess on my first page is pretty much is a summary of the rebuttal for the first sale that the applicant has presented. Like, we view it as a post-reference sale, but the applicant is indicating that it closed before the reference date. But regardless, the indicated cap rate that we've calculated is 3.19%, whereas Altus has calculated a 6.85% cap rate. On page 3 is our stabilization for that. You can see that based off of the income and expense information from 2018, 19, and 20, we've stabilized an NOI of 36,207. And when you apply it against a sale price of 1,135,000, the cap rate is 3.19%. And at the bottom of the chart, It says the differences between the City of Winnipeg stabilized and Altus stabilized. Altus used the Realtor's pro forma, which is just, I guess, an estimate, and it's significantly different from what was reported. Which is, once again, sometimes when the owner is trying to sell something, sometimes they make it out to be a little bit more than it is. But when you apply the actual income and expenses to the property, it calculates out to 3.19%. And if you go back to my first page, for 203 Yale, the property was purchased for was not purchased for the NOI in place. It was it was purchased, renovated, and then resold. So I'm not sure if it was the best cap rate sale. For 535 Corden, we calculated a cap rate very similar to what the applicant calculated. For 1139 Grant, Altus had calculated a cap rate of 5.55%, and we calculated a cap rate of 4.46%. And for 677 Maryland, Altus calculated 5.66, and we calculated 5.5. And for a 32 Arden, Altus calculated 5.42, and we calculated 5.05. So the information is on the later pages of this document. And so for these properties, like when you use their actual income and expenses rather than a pro forma or an estimate, the indicated cap rates are lower than what the applicant is indicating. And that's the summary for the rebuttal information that I presented.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, I do. Okay, so I appreciate this is new information for me, so I'll do my best to go through it, seeing it for the first time. But Mr. Wong, you're suggesting, just very quickly, when I look at Victor, you're suggesting that that's a 3.19 cap rate?
When you look at the information, yes.
Okay, does that not strike you? Did you do this stabilization yourself?
No, my colleague did.
Okay. If you were doing it yourself, would a 3.19 cap, based on what we know of the market, based on what the brokers are saying, based on your own modeling, would that not seem quite out of sorts?
It would seem on the lower end of the range, but it does seem legitimate.
It would seem not just on the lower end, but the lowest cap rate that we've seen just submitted into evidence in general. Is that fair to say? 3.1.
Maybe for you.
Oh, okay. So you've used.
I can help you with that. I don't think we're going to consider this property should be assessed at a 3.19% cap.
Thank you. Okay, that's all I need to know about that one. The sale that you mentioned on Yale, you said it resold. That sale is post-reference, correct? 7/16/21.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and then for these others, you haven't provided any background, any supporting documents. I'll review these when I'm back in the office, but without the supporting documents, I don't think I have any more questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Panel members, Mr. Rupert, do you have any questions?
I have no questions. No.
No. And I don't either. Thank you. Okay, so this now completes the evidence on 54 Yonge Street. We proceed with our next property on the agenda, which is 181 Balmoral.
Sorry, I'm just reviewing some information
That's fine. When you're ready to proceed, you can.
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Story, you were saying that the McPhillips property sold for a 5% cap based off of the information that you supplied?
Based on the NOI presented in the marketing brochure. Now, in the marketing brochure, the asking price is $1 million higher than what was actually achieved. So if you take the sales price, which you have correctly stated in your brief, versus the NOI advertised by the seller, you come to a 5% cap rate.
Okay. Okay, I was just looking at the capitalization rate that they were kind of using, and they were saying 4.75. So
that's if they achieved the 20.9, but it sold for 19. It was exposed to the market and sold for $1 million less than what they were asking. That was a 5 cap. It's a unique property. It's one of the newer properties in the Garden City, Templeton, St. Clair area. It's very popular. It's next to the Walmart and the hospital. So 5% cap is reasonable. And that's
okay.
That's what
Okay,
the
so
number is.
that was your calculation and not necessarily the cap rate that they were utilizing.
Well, the cap rate that they're utilizing is
Mr.
one
Wolf, I
based
thought we
on
had
the,
proceeded on to our next property.
Okay. Okay. No. So no, that's fine. So I was just looking at the information, and I just wanted to understand where we're coming from. But we are ready to move on.
I believe so. Yeah, I think we'd like to hear your evidence now on 181 Balmoral Avenue.
Okay.
Okay.
The subject property is 181 Balmoral. The roll number is 120-911-59500. It's a residential apartment block that's 3 stories high. It was built in 1913 and has 14 suites with 1 outdoor parking stall. On page 2 are some sales of the subject property. It's in 2000. It sold for $745,000 in 2015. 975,000 in 2018, and it sold for 735,000 in 2021. On page 3 is the location of the subject property with an overhead view. The current condition of the property is vacant. To reflect that in our income valuation summary on page 4, we used an average rent of $703 to get a potential income of $118,000, but we used a 25% vacancy to recognize its vacant situation and to get an effective gross income of $88,000. We used a 60% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $35,000. We used a 5.7% cap rate to get an estimated market value of $617,000. Like I said, this property is vacant, so it's a little bit difficult to estimate the value, but it seems like the estimate that we've utilized using a 25% vacancy, the value being at $616,000, is supported by the sale of the property in March 2021, which sold for $735,000. So considering that the property sold for $735,000 in its vacant situation, I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $617,000.
Thank you, that's your evidence. Mr. Story, any questions?
Thank you very much. So just to be very clear, this property is 108 years old, and you mentioned that it's vacant, but you're aware, of course, that it was boarded up and by injunction as it was deemed a hazard. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Have you reviewed my evidence?
I don't question that.
You question that?
I don't question that statement.
Okay. All right. So now you mentioned the sale. Now clearly that sale was not for the income in place. It was purchased, boarded up, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And it was a mortgage sale, correct?
I'm not sure.
Okay. That's Mr. Chair, that's Title 3030817-1/1. Now again, IAAO standard on verification and adjustment of sales. Section 5.4 says that sales involving financial institutions as buyer or seller are generally considered invalid. Is that correct?
If that's what it says.
5.4 subsection 4 says a foreclosure is not a sale, but the legal process by which a lien on a property is enforced. Are you aware of that?
No.
Then it goes on to say in the same standard on verification that any properties that have been vandalized should be excluded. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that.
And in the previous cycle, now I recognize that this is a model and I'm not trying to compare assessments. However, in its previous state, the model applied a cap rate of 6.6%. So we're not asking for a huge reduction, but the compression of 90 basis points to a property that was boarded up and deemed a hazard, leading to a 30% increase in value. Does that not seem illogical on some level?
I'm not looking at the previous assessment.
Okay. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions of the assessors? No. Thank you. Ms. Rempel, do you have any questions?
No.
And I don't either, so go ahead. Mr. Story?
Not to put too fine a point on this, but this building was gutted. It was it was deemed a hazard. It was boarded up. There were rampant fires and other criminal things that were happening. That's in my brief, page 11. Balmoral Street Heritage Apartment boarded up after inspectors deemed it unsafe. Okay, so my client purchased it. The intention is to renovate it over time. There will be clearly a supplementary at some point, but it may be outside of the purview of this assessment cycle. So that is why we are appealing it today. Effectively, we're not asking for a huge reduction. We do think that the sale should not be validated as it was a mortgage sale. So we're basically accepting all of the assessor's inputs. They're in line. They appear to be in line with CMHC. However, we asked that the cap rate from the previous cycle of 6.6 carry forward, leading us to a value of $533,000. We believe that an increase of 30% cycle over cycle for a building in this condition is inappropriate. I appreciate that what the assessor said, that it is a difficult property to look at. There's no income in place, and we don't know what will happen once it's built. But for the time being, in the interim, we do suggest that the value of $533,000 is appropriate, and that is based on carry forward of the 6.6 cap from the previous cycle, which was not disputed. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? Mr. Wong?
Did the current owners purchase the property of their own free will?
I would assume that they purchased it of their own will, yes.
That would be all my questions.
Mr. Ripper, any questions?
No questions, thanks.
Ms. Ripper, do you have any questions? No questions. And I don't either, thank you. Okay. So next on the agenda is 506 Balmoral. So Juan, when you're ready.
Okay, the subject property is 506 Balmoral. The roll number is 130-519-86000. It's a residential apartment block that was built in 1961 and has 14 suites with 4 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is the location of the subject property with some exterior photos. So on page 4 are some interior photos. The property appears to be in good condition and well maintained. On page 5 is our income valuation summary. We used an average rent of $723 to get a potential income of $121,000. We used a 3.2% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $117,000. And we used a 53% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $54,000. Capped at 5.6%, we have an estimated market value of $971,000. On page 6 are some rent comparables showing that the rents we've used are in line with what's on the market. On page 7 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 8 are some cap rate sales. 500 Burnell seems to be the most similar to the subject property, and it sold for $100,000 per unit, which supports the current assessed value at $69,000 per unit. On page 9 is some cap rate information from Altus. On page 11 is the income and expenses submitted by the owner. So again, it seems like the most reliable number is the income, which is coming in at $116,746, which is in line with what the model is estimated at $117,000. So the rents that the model has applied is in line with the actuals and is supported by the market, and the expenses at 53% is reasonable for a property that's in good condition and well maintained. The cap rate and the overall value is supported by the market, so I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $971,000.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Any questions, Mr. Stewart?
I do, thank you. Mr. Wong, you've mentioned a number of times here that it's great condition, well maintained. Now you're basing this, I assume, on page 4, and these are marketing photos of a renovated suite. Is that correct?
They're marketing photos.
Okay. Have you been in this property?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Now this stretch of Balmoral, I'm acutely aware of it. I mentioned Central Park briefly. If you cross the street and you get into streets like Capel, that's considered Central Park, correct?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, just for the sake of argument, it is. Now, in the past, I've seen adjustments, it would appear, based on location of Central Park. Is that still the case? Is there a cap rate adjustment for, are there cap rate adjustments for certain areas in the apartment cap rate model, and is Central Park one of those areas?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Now the effective gross income is very close, so I will skip over that. We're basically talking about cap rate on this file. Now, locationally, I think I've asked if that was a consideration. One thing that's come up here, this is a wood frame building. Marshall and Swift would suggest that a wood frame apartment this quality has an effective economic life of 45 years. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Okay, and this property is, we can agree, it is indeed 61 years old, and it has not been adjusted. So it's safe to say the model is treating it as though it's true to its vintage. Is that fair?
I believe so.
Okay. And again, we've talked about amenities, we've talked about the cap rate considerations. Is it fair to say that this building doesn't have any amenities? It's also far removed from groceries, for example.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the. Yeah, I mean, there is a Safeway around there
Safeway?
by Maryland and Sherbrooke.
Okay, the fresh one. Okay. It's a ways away, but okay, that's fine. Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions of the assessor, Super?
I don't have any.
There's no any questions? And I don't move this, so this, so yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, as we've established, we have an older shoebox style apartment on Balmoral across from Central Park. This is considered the Spence neighborhood. It's built in 1961, 2.5 stories, 14 suites, 12 one bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. The reference date, of course, is April 1/21, and we are requesting a value of $802,000. Now, this is largely based on the cap rate. Just go very quickly to my cap rate consideration. So again, wood frame construction, as I've illustrated when going through my cap rate study, wood frame does carry a higher risk, carries higher maintenance costs over time, and a property that is 61 years old is outside of the window of its expected useful economic life. So an owner would expect that there are higher costs to be expected. The building again does not contain any amenities. It's very standard. It is removed from tenant amenities that you would consider essential, such as groceries and things of that nature. And we have we've determined that the potential for income growth is likely poor based on the location of the asset and a less than desirable suite mix. Parking is extremely limited. Again, location is a factor. And once again, as we've mentioned, supply and demand side, multifamily inventory appears to be saturated with new supply at the reference date. So that has accelerated the obsolescence of the older multifamily stock. For a property such as this, we would typically, based on a good location, based on everything else being in good condition, we would suggest a cap rate of roughly 5.5%. However, we do note the construction, lack of amenities, low quality durability of income, lack of parking, poor suite mix, age, and the supply and demand factors. And so we have accordingly adjusted to 6%. So all of that taken into consideration on page 10, I have my income workup. Effectively, our NOI is $48,126. We do note that the expenses are 60.3%. The city's modeled expenses are 53.8%. I'm not sure if this accounts for the type of structure, the wood frame, but we're using actuals as reported. So our NOI again is 48,126, capitalized with the 6 cap rate. Excuse me. Leads us to a indicated market value of $802,000 at the reference date, and we do respectfully submit that the value be adjusted to $802,000. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, any questions?
And no questions.
Mr. Ricker, any questions of,
None, thank you.
Swinton?
None, thank you.
No, we're good, thank you. Okay, we'll next go on with 573 Sherbrooke Avenue. Mr. Long,
Okay. The subject property is 573 Sherbrooke. The roll number is 130-503-31000. It's a residential apartment block that's 3 stories high. It's built in 1930 and has 31 suites with no outdoor parking. On page 3 is the location of the subject property with some exterior photos. On page 4 are some interior photos. It does appear to be in good condition. On page 5 is our income valuation summary. We used average rents of $612 to get a potential income of $227,000. We used a 3.2% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $220,000. And we used a 59% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $89,000. Capped at 5.7%, we have an estimated market value of $1,562,000. On page 6 are some rent comparables showing that the rents we've used are in line with what's on the market. On page 7 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 8 are some cap rate sales. The model is estimated about $50,000 per unit, and when you look at some of the sales, it is that those sales support the $50,000 per unit. On page 11 to 14 are the income statements supplied by the owner. And looking at their income, it was about $207,000. It's lower than what the model has estimated at $220,000. So I'd like to provide a revised value based off of the effective gross income being $207,757. I guess if you go back to my page 5, I'd like to adjust the effective gross income from 220 to 207,757. And I think the 59% expense ratio is reasonable. So applying a 59% expenses, the expenses are $123,948. The resulting net operating income is $83,809. And capping that at 5.7%, the estimated value is $1,470,000. That works out to about $47,000, which is lower than what some of the sales are indicating.
is that acceptable to you, Mr. Story?
I appreciate the offer, but I would like to proceed. The cap rate is too low. Thank you.
Can we any further, Mr.
Pardon me?
Do you have any further evidence? Mr. Story?
No, that would be just everything is my revised value is $1,470,000.
So, Mr. Story, any questions you might have?
I have a few, yes, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Wong, for reviewing that. We do note that the actual average rent being achieved here is $509.44 per month. So I guess, Mr. Wong, the question becomes, if the income is so low, would the risk profile then not be adjusted upward? Would the cap rate not have to be adjusted if you recognize that the rents are so much lower than what the model is recognized?
I mean, that could be a possibility, but that's why I don't necessarily love looking at every line item and then picking apart each individual detailed line items. Just like to look at, when you look at the overall value, it does seem very reasonable. And so, I mean, you could make an argument for a potentially higher cap rate, but like I said, when you look at the overall value, it seems to be very reasonable at the low end of the range and fair.
Okay, and just not to belabor this, but have you been inside this property?
I have not.
And do you have a sense of the history of this stretch of apartment blocks in the 500 block of Sherbrooke?
I have some feel for it, yes.
Okay, so you're aware then that the property next door was burnt down in a sort of gang rivalry. Are you aware of that?
Well, you know what? There are areas that have crime and that are maybe not the safest neighborhoods, but at the same time, do apartment blocks sell there? Yes, they do. It's not like the apartment blocks do not sell in areas that are.
Great. Okay, and do you think an investor would put a higher risk premium on this property then, based on what we're talking about?
Potentially.
Okay, those are my questions, Mr.
Thank you. Mr. Rep, do you have any questions to the assessor?
I know, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
He's switching.
Sorry. Okay, and I don't want to do this. Mr. Sorry, you have your evidence?
Oh, sorry, I have a question.
Oh, you did, sorry.
I know you didn't visit the property, Mr. Long, but I'm looking at the photographs of the interior, and you're showing an effective date of 1930. The building structure may be 1930, but would you suggest that there's a higher effective date based on the cosmetic improvements?
I based off of the photos, I would suggest so. Unfortunately, we aren't able to update every property as keep every property characteristics as up to date as we'd like, and it appears that this one maybe should be updated in terms of the effective year built.
Okay, so for the time being, we have to accept 1930. Thank you.
Ms. Whipple has a question.
Sorry, a question just arose to me. Can you tell me when these photos were taken of the interior of this apartment building?
No. They're from I believe they're from the property owner, the property manager.
Okay, and I have no questions, so Mr. Story, you can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Okay, so we've established that we have an older building here on in Sherbrooke. There's some issues with the area. To be certain, we don't appear to be in any disagreement with that. We're suggesting though that the cap rate is too low at 5.7% and does not capture the risk of this property. Again, amenities are an issue. Income growth is an issue. There's no parking. The suite mix is poor. The property is 91 years old. The location would objectively be considered below average or inferior. And again, we have the supply and demand issue. Now, we've looked at, once again, we've stabilized the income and expenses. We come to an NOI of 79,196. However, we do apply a cap rate of 6.5%. Now, our typical range or stratification for properties built before 1946, we're suggesting that these cap rates should fall somewhere between 6.1 and 6.6. This is falling on the higher end of that range to be certain, but it's not without reason. Again, the area, there's a locational factor that should be considered. And I've been inside this property. I've included photos of the interior and the exterior, starting on page 22. 24, you see the interior, 25. So Mr. Whitbread, you mentioned the effective age or how it should be adjusted. Now, typically the marketing photos that are included may not be indicative of the overall quality of the property. Now, and again, we would suggest that cosmetic changes to individual suites trigger a full adjustment to the effective age, as a change to the effective age in the model distorts the cap rate and depresses it. So we're suggesting that based on the age, based on the location, no parking, potential for income appreciation, that a value of no more than $1,218,000 be applied. Now we do note that is on the lower end, but we do have a at the back end of our cap study, we do show a number of sales showing prices per suite, and for older properties they do range, and it's typically based on the location, degree of renovation. So though that $39,000 per door does seem low, it is indicative of the actual rents being achieved and the risk profile that should be applied to this property. So again, $1,218,000 is our request to this board today, and barring any questions, that is my submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, any questions, sir? Mr. Stewart?
No questions. No questions.
Mr. Luke?
Just one. You show in your evidence a date of 1961
Typo, yeah.
versus the assessor's evidence.
That is a typo. I apologize.
Is it a typo?
It's a typo.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. Well, I saw that too.
Please.
Yeah.
Mr. Luke, any questions?
I'm wondering about your pictures as well.
Sure.
And did you take these pictures?
I took them myself. Yes, with my phone. I toured a number of the properties with the owner, and this was part of the tour that we went on that day.
And when were these taken?
This would be, so I'd like to give you an exact date, but it's certainly within the relevant period. There's an issue where we appealed some of these for 2021, so it would have been outside of 2020, so sometime between 2021 and 2022. So they are relevant. They're not particularly old, but I sometimes I date them. Let me see if I have a August 26, 2020. That's when they were taken.
Thank you.
Okay, so you indicated in the photos that were submitted by the assessor, the marketing photos of renovated suites, but your photos don't show that much difference. It's just the fact that tenants have furniture in yours that maybe be tracked from the appearance.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think if you look at the actual, well, yeah, perhaps, but I think that you get a more true sense of the quality of the property. Now, again, the quality of the interior is, the rent is a function of the quality of the interior, and we're using the actual rents. The bigger question here, now that the assessor has adjusted the rents, is the cap rate. So these are not luxury or higher end apartments by any stretch of the imagination. The rent is extremely low. There's no parking. There's a history of some issues in the location. So based on its age, 6.1 to 6.6, 6.5.
I know you've already got your your answer. You just asked the question again.
Sure.
And I'm looking at the photo of the frontage of the property, and it shows, I'm saying newer windows, I'm not bragging you, but certainly they've changed the windows. I'm sure done other maintenance items to update the property.
Sure.
These aren't original windows.
No, those are not original windows. You also notice the institutional steel door, which is not typical, but
I get the tenants in their
security.
Security, yes. Absolutely. Okay, thank you. So we now are then ready to go on with the last item on the agenda, which is 545 Young Street. And when you're ready, Mr. Wong.
Okay, the subject property is 545 Young. The roll number is 130 513 72100. Excuse me. It's a residential apartment block that's 3 stories high. It was built in 1959, and we have 23 units with 12 outdoor parking stalls. On page 2 is some sales information on the subject property. On page 3 is the location of the subject property with some exterior photos. On page 4 are some interior photos of the subject property. On page 5 is our income valuation summary. We used average rents of $753 to get a potential income of $207,000. We used a 3.2% vacancy to get a effective gross income of $201,000. And we used a 53% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $94,000. Capped at 5.7%, we have an estimated market value of $1,656,000, which is about $72,000 per unit. On page 6 are some rent comparables showing that the rents we've used are in line with what's in the market. On page 7 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 8 are some cap rate sales. Once again, it shows that the cap rates can be a little bit lower, but the sales value per suite is supportive of what the model is applied at $72,000 per unit. On page 11 is the income and expenses submitted by the owner. As maybe with a few of the other properties, I noticed that their income is $178,000, which is lower than what the model has estimated at $201,000. So I'd like to suggest a revised value based off of the effective gross income of $178,019. And using the 53% expense ratio, which is the expenses are $94,510. And the net yielding a net operating income of $83,509. Capped at 5.7%, the revised value is $1,465,000, which is $64,000 per unit. And so, the new value utilizes the income supplied by the owner, and the expenses are reasonable for a building that's in good condition. The cap rate and the overall value is supported by the market. So I ask that you accept the revised value of $1,465,000.
Sorry, would you repeat the revised value?
$1,465,000.
Thank you.
Is that acceptable to you, Mr. Story?
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Chair, I'd like to proceed, and I will limit my issues to the cap rate. There's still the issue of the cap rate. But thank you, Mr. Wong. I appreciate it.
If you have any questions, then you can
Sure.
ask them.
So, Mr. Wong, we've discussed you've reevaluated the income, and I do thank you for that. Now, one thing to consider, though, and just to carry this forward from the previous rec, the actual rents were all discounted at the reference date. Is that correct? According to the owner.
The rents. I'm not sure.
Okay, and based on the quality of the income, the age of the property, and the construction type, do you think that perhaps I think you've answered this already, but do you think the cap rate ought to be adjusted upward given the higher risk profile inherent in this property? Is that fair?
It could be adjusted higher up, or it could be left the same depending on other aspects of the valuation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Whitford?
No, thank you.
Ms. Whipple? No. And I don't think there. Mr. Story?
Thank you very much. Okay, last one. So we're in the Spence neighborhood, 545 Yonge Street. Again, this property has 23 suites, 22 one-bedrooms, and 1 two-bedroom suite. It is 3 stories and it was built in 1959. Now, I think we've gone through most of this already. We will limit our discussion to the cap rate. Again, based on the age of this property, we would typically apply a cap rate of no less than 5.75, assuming a good location, assuming good condition, and all other factors being positive. However, we have recognized that this property is wood frame construction. Again, no amenities. We note that the durability and the quality of the income is poor. All of the rents at the reference date are indeed discounted. There's limited parking. Suite mix is poor. The property is 63 years old. Again, we note that Marshall and Swift indicates that a 45-year economic life is typical of apartments of this quality and of this construction grade. And again, location, as all the properties that we've looked at today would probably be considered in the eyes of most purchasers, would give some increased pause and a higher risk profile. So with all that being said, and of course with an eye to supply and demand and noticing that some of the older properties are becoming or accelerating in their obsolescence, we are suggesting that a cap rate of no less than 6% be applied, consistent with all the submissions that we've put forth to the board today. And with that being said, I turn to my page 9, and now that the NOI has been adjusted, we're not worlds apart there. The assessor is suggesting 83,509. We stabilized to a rate of 80,997. Now I do point out that the expenses that the assessor will use are a function then of the new NOI. They're not calculated. It should actually go the other way. The expense ratio should be a function of the income versus the expenses, not generated by a percentage. So just want to point that out. So our NOI is 80,997, as illustrated by our stabilized chart on page 9, capitalized with a rate of 6%. So taken together, we come to an indicated market value at the reference date of $1,349,957, and we do respectfully submit that the value as at the reference date not exceed $1,350,000, which is frankly a little bit high on a per door analysis at $59,000 per door based on the age, but that is the number that our analysis has come to, and I do submit that value should be amended again to $1,350,000. And I thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Mr. Wong?
No questions.
Luke, any questions?
None, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do you have any questions? No. And I don't have either, so thank you. So we've now heard all items scheduled for hearing today, so I'm now going to adjourn this meeting.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Wong.
And thank you both for your.
Thank you. Good day.